Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Thursday, May 26th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 101 days, the game against Michigan in 185 days. Just like we did earlier this week, we're going to be answering some listener questions on today's show. Tony Gerdeman and I have done 3 separate episodes of Buckeye Weekly answering your questions. This is now the second Morning Scoop episode with these questions this week. You guys, we asked for questions and you guys delivered, so we are eternally grateful to you for that. Tony joins me again this morning. I'm eternally grateful to him for that. Tony, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. A long time no see, Tom. Hope you're doing well.
Always a pleasure to do a podcast with Tony, and always a pleasure to answer a question from @Don Suskind. He asked a great one. I saw this one and I was like, man, this could go a million different directions. And then he had some great suggestions in the question itself. I'm just going to read it in its entirety. What is the Mount Rushmore of Big Ten gaffes? I'd posit legends and leaders as one. COVID's cancellation/uncancellation and denial of mistake is another. Beyond those, maybe Maryland and Rutgers. And conversely, what are the Big Ten's traditional Mount Rushmore good moves? Maybe the Big Ten Network, Penn State, what else? Tony, first of all, I think he's got the at least three of the 4 bad ones. I think he's got up there as just right in that question.
Yeah, because you hear that, and I remember reading it, and I'm like, well, you got the answers right there. What do you need us for? Because legends and leaders, while I don't know that it did any damage, it did PR damage, and people joked about it. And I guess anytime you make a move that people just see as creates some laughing stock, then you've hurt your conference. So I think that is correct. The 2020 season, how they handled things, like that could be, there's probably 4 decisions in there that could be the Mount Rushmore of Big Ten gaffes. Now, Maryland and Rutgers, do we consider that one thing, just like a 2-headed thing, like where it's Mount Rushmore, but this one is like, it has 2 heads, and then we have to figure out a third one. And I think maybe like these are I think we all agree that these are the main 3 if we're considering Maryland and Rutgers one. So then it becomes, well, what is the 4th one? And I don't know that I have a great answer, because I just locked onto these suggestions here, and it would have to, you have to think about it. But there are certainly some options, but it's just hard to get past the gravity of like canceling the 2020 season and all of the things that went into that, and not even talking politically, just the lack of communication and the questions that remained throughout, and the parents having to have a protest just to be heard. And there are a number of decisions in there that could be 2 heads, 3 heads, 4 heads on this Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, and then the way the schedule ended up, we're going to talk about the first schedule they put out as an updated schedule. The second schedule they put out as an updated schedule had gotten rid of all the pad time, all the extra weeks. They kind of backed themselves into a corner, and then you ended up with kind of a messy schedule. The other thing that I think you could add to this list is the way the Big Ten schedules in general. If you look at, I did a series a couple of years ago, back when I was with the Ozone, and I talked to the guy who did the Big Ten scheduling at the time, and then I talked to the guy who did the SEC scheduling at the time, and just sort of got their philosophy on how they do things. Because if you look at it, an awful lot of times, SEC teams will have a week off before they have a big rivalry game, or SEC teams will have, they have the SEC SoCon Challenge week the week before the big rivalry week at the end of the season. You're sort of setting yourself up to be relatively healthy for your big games. You're not putting they generally don't put teams in really bad back-to-back situations. They're kind of premier brands. They don't have Alabama going on the road back-to-back all that often to, Texas A&M and then LSU back-to-back weeks on the road. That just kind of doesn't happen. There are, the Pac-12 will do that. The Pac-12 will send USC up to Washington State on a Thursday night after they were playing, a game the week before. They'll do stuff like that puts their sort of marquee brands at a disadvantage. The Big Ten does that too. The Big Ten will have Ohio State play. They've had in 2019, they had Ohio State host Penn State and then play at Michigan, and then they had to play the Big Ten championship game in 2019. Those 3 back-to-back-to-back, home for Penn State, at Michigan, and then Wisconsin. By the time they got to Wisconsin, They were kind of run down, which meant that then they came out of the gate kind of slow in Indianapolis. Ended up they had been number one in the college football playoff rankings. Ended up sliding behind LSU because LSU came out and just wiped the floor with whoever it was they were playing that year in the SEC championship game. And that meant Ohio State had to go play Clemson instead of having the round one bye against Oklahoma. And so Ohio State did not advance to the national championship that year. And I think you can kind of directly attribute that to the Big Ten scheduling. It's just sort of a different philosophy. The Big Ten is interested in fairness, and the SEC is interested in success. And, fairness is great. And, trying to keep everyone happy and trying to make everything as equitable as possible is great. But if the other guys are doing it a different way, I think that puts you at a pretty significant disadvantage. That was kind of the conclusion I came to after talking to those folks a couple of years ago. Still kind of think that might be true. They're sort of maybe getting away from it now, and there could be major changes coming to Big Ten scheduling in just a year. So we'll see. We'll see with the we talked about that with the scheduling pods and all that kind of stuff. So that may all be changing very soon. But for now, I think that belongs on that bad Mount Rushmore. For the good Mount Rushmore, I mean, the Big Ten Network, Tony. I mean, that's like the Mount Rushmore of literally anyone in college football's best moves of this century. Penn State obviously has been a very good addition, and Penn State comes with whatever. There's been plenty of other stuffs around Penn State since then that has not all been 100% positive, but overall that's been a pretty good addition. What other suggestions would you have on the good side of things?
Yeah, and for all of the criticism that Jim Delaney has received, the creation of the Big Ten Network is something that has been followed by everybody, not as successful by anybody, which is a statement about the Big Ten and a statement about the fan base that the conference has. And Jim Delaney is a polarizing figure. I'd argue, thinking about what the gaffes, him stepping down when he did and stepping down early, and the timing was terrible. He couldn't have known, but stepping down like 6 months early and then handing things over to Kevin Warren to handle during COVID, I think things would have been much different if Jim Delaney had been around. He would have had more say. Now, would his say have gone the same way? Because we know he was very conservative in change and didn't want change. And so maybe if he didn't want to play, he would have convinced others to not play as well. And who knows how things would have gone at that point, because very powerful person. But certainly the Big Ten network, adding Penn State, I think was great. And it was so long ago now, almost 30 years now since they've basically been announced. Not quite 30 years. This may be their 30th year of playing, starting in 93. So I think also, Tom, would you put up there the addition of Penn State, but also the way that the Big Ten has fooled Penn State into thinking that they're a full member, but honestly, there's a conspiracy that you only brought them in to keep them from winning it, and you get to manipulate things. So I say adding Penn State, creating the Big Ten ref power struggle with Penn State, that's certainly one on there. The addition of Nebraska, I think, is right up there as well. It gave the Big Ten 12 teams, allowed them to go to a conference championship game, which brings in more money, and I think the program, the legacy, the history of Nebraska fits with the Big Ten, as Penn State did and has continued to prove that. One that I would add in here was, and it was fleeting, the creation of the schedule in 2020, the 10-game Big Ten schedule, which had 3 games and then a break, then another 3 games and a break, or 2 games. They had it collapsible where if a team had to miss a game, you could play it, you could make it up in 2 or 3 weeks, and they had a 2-week buffer at the end of the season for the Big Ten championship game. But they created 10 games over 14 weeks, and it was a remarkable schedule. It was all Big Ten games because they didn't want any non-conference opponents. They didn't want the Dirty Mac coming in here, playing in their stadiums and getting everybody sick. But it was self-contained and many more ways than one, and it would have been great, and it was so good, Tom, that the uproar about Ohio State Michigan playing on October 24th in the middle of the season wasn't even all that bad.
Well, it wasn't even all that bad. And, you look back at how things played out with the second updated schedule after the first one, where it was 8 games in 8 weeks. And, well, if you missed a game, you missed a game, and that's how it goes. You saw that play out kind of difficult, in a difficult way for Ohio State, where they missed the Maryland game, they missed the Illinois game, and then they missed the Michigan game. And they had to tweak the rules to get Ohio State into the Big Ten championship game at all. And then there was a question of whether only playing 6 games going into the college football playoff was enough of a body of work to get them into the college football playoff. If that had left them out of the college football playoff, that would have gone down as maybe one of the single biggest bad decisions in the history of the Big Ten. But yeah, the first version of this updated schedule that came out, on August, I think they canceled the season on August 6th, and the updated schedule came out on August 1st or something like that. It was like 5-6 days before they canceled the season. And the decision that quote unquote would not be revisited. You look at that October 24th Ohio State Michigan game. It was like, yes, this would be a very non-traditional. This would break with a century of tradition, but if you look back at it, if they hadn't been able to play that first week, well, there were several other options to get that game in, and they ended up breaking with. There were plenty of traditions broken that year, such as fans in the stands and marching bands and all that kind of stuff. Not getting to play that game in 2020, I think if you had polled every Ohio State football player, they would have said, I don't care when we play that game, as long as we get to play that game. And the fact that they didn't, that's, that is going to be one of those things that forever will be, that's one of those games that's going to be talked about forever as a what if, what would have happened if Ohio State had played that game. Michigan obviously was very, very shorthanded with COVID stuff at that point, so they were sort of backed into a corner, not able to play that game. So yeah, that's a good one. I'm with you though on Nebraska. Nebraska, I know people are going to look at that and go, well, but they haven't been that good. It's like, yes, but they're still, they are still a cultural fit in this conference. They are still, you look at Iowa and Minnesota, and Nebraska fits right in there with them. I do wonder, where would you have not taking Missouri when Missouri was kind of poking around at one point? Missouri, in terms of the Big Ten footprint, would have fit very neatly in between Nebraska and Illinois and all those teams around there. Iowa, would you have Missouri as a team? Is that a good decision? Is that on the good Mount Rushmore, not taking Missouri, or is that on the bad Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this leading up to the show, where some of these that go on the good Mount Rushmore would be the decisions not taken, like not bringing in a particular school. But I think Missouri would have been a fine ad. It gives you the St. Louis market, and we care about markets, and that's why we do this, and that's why Jim Delaney brings in Rutgers. So it would have been a good market to have, and I think the quality of play is certainly better than what you got out of Maryland and Rutgers. It's not east enough though, obviously, and they wanted to go east. I would be fine if Missouri was in the Big Ten right now. I think we'd be talking about them like we do anybody else, but it's like it's just adding another Purdue. But what is Rutgers and Maryland? What are they like? Are they?
The poor man's Purdue?
Yeah, I mean, it's just exactly. It's a rich man's Purdue versus a poor man's Purdue, and that's what we've gotten. And I think that would have been a decent ad, Missouri. And do they? But are you talking about them in terms of talking about Missouri in terms of that round where they brought in Maryland and Rutgers? Or are you talking about them instead of Nebraska?
I think that was around the time of Nebraska, because I think Mizzou was in the SEC by 2013 or so. So they would have been before the Maryland and Nebraska, or the Maryland and Rutgers round, because those joined in 2014. So yeah, do you just go to 14 at that point? Go from 11 prior to the addition of Nebraska, and then 2011 you add Nebraska and Missouri and fill in the blank third school, whoever it is. They were obviously thinking in terms of TV markets then, which was a very 2011 to 2014 way to think about things. And then the cord cutting revolution has pretty much instantly rendered that not necessarily the way you think about these things anymore. It is interesting to look at, if you're looking for a sort of a parallel way to think about this, you look at what the Sun Belt has done as opposed to the way Conference USA has gone about things. Conference USA was always looking at markets. They added teams like Charlotte and Rice, which was in Houston, and looked at teams from big TV areas, big cities. Like, oh, we'll get this whole city captivated by Conference USA football, and then it turns out that, well, not that many people in Charlotte care about Charlotte football. So then the Sun Belt just kind of was going for big football brands, and they got Georgia Southern and they got Appalachian State. And they got all those conferences, and now with the American losing a bunch of teams to the Big 12, you probably have that conversation where the Sun Belt might be the strongest football conference outside of the Power Five. So there are kind of levels to this, and we'll see if 30 years from now the Big Ten really is the New York's Big Ten. New York is Big Ten country, and Washington D.C. is Big Ten country. We'll see whether that plays out that way. So far, it seems like they kind of have rich man's Charlotte in a couple big cities on the East Coast. So, well, that was a fantastic question. Second show this week where we've gotten through exactly one question because you guys are asking fantastic questions. So, thank you to Don Suskind, and thank you to everyone else who asked questions over the last few weeks. Tony and I have been going through those on Buckeye Weekly. You'll hear a couple shows this week where we answered a whole bunch more, and you will undoubtedly ask you guys for questions at some point later in the summer because you guys always have really interesting stuff to talk about, and we're not here to talk to ourselves. We're here to talk to you and answer talk about the stuff you guys want to know. And when we ask you those questions, that's a great way for us to know what you guys want to know about. So thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.